I think that the first thing that naturally comes to many people's minds when they see a new 2D Ninja Gaiden game is, does it live up to the legacy of the NES titles, especially in terms of difficulty? Is Ninja Gaiden Ragebound a worthy successor to the 8-bit trilogy? As someone who enjoys the NES games but isn't overly attached to them, I personally didn't expect Ragebound to be anything like the classics, so I didn't approach it with those questions in mind and simply saw Ragebound as its own thing. That said, I understand why others might have those expectations. It's natural for fans to want certain elements of the older games to be preserved or brought back in the newer titles. We're seeing this with Ninja Gaiden 4. But, as is often the case with sequels and spiritual successors, some changes are made, and even when changes are well executed, there's still a reluctance to fully embrace them. Now, I had a great time playing Ragebound, and I'm genuinely thrilled to see the series making a comeback. But as I was making this video, I had time to consider some of the criticisms raised by other fans, players whose experience with the game wasn't quite as positive as mine. Hearing those perspectives gave me a fuller picture. It made me realize that certain design choices in Ragebound might not sit well with fans who were hoping for a direct continuation of the 2D trilogy style and challenge. So that's what I want to explore here. I'm not just going to share my experience, but also try to view Ragebound through the lens of someone seeking a true follow-up to the NES games. My hope is that by looking at it from both angles, I can give you a clearer idea of whether or not Ragebound is a game worth your time. The game's controls feel fantastic, and that's noticeable right from the very first level, where you play as Joe Hayabusa, Ryu's father, as he makes his way to the life-or-death duel that we see in the opening of the first NG game on the NES. Even though he doesn't have all basic abilities unlocked, you can tell the game controls very smoothly. Your animations are quick, you can more freely adjust your jump arc, particularly when jumping backwards, and you are no longer direction locked when you slash mid-air. You also have the ability to recover mid-air after being hit if you press the jump button quickly enough. This will save your life numerous times, I guarantee it. The regular sword slash also has quite a large hitbox, and it stays active for quite a while, not requiring the precision from classic NG, and you can comfortably hit enemies above you and deflect projectiles. This, combined with your ability to redirect your slash mid-swing, can create some really cool moments where you take down multiple enemies with just a single attack. It's easy to see all of this as an objective improvement over the originals. However, a legitimate argument can be made that classic Ninja Gaiden, much like classic Castlevania, is defined by its limitations, like having to commit to a jump, having to take into account that you can't switch directions quickly, or having to time precise attacks. All of these restrictions in movement and attack options can be viewed as the foundation of the game, and what shapes the level design, the pacing, and the strategies players are likely to use. Fans of that more restrictive style of gameplay might have mixed feelings about the controls in Ragebound. While undeniably great, you might find it too reminiscent of something like Strider, Hagane, or other high-mobility action platformers, and not exactly reminiscent of Ninja Gaiden. Still in the prologue, there's a section that might feel a little off to fans of the classics. The screen locks, and you have to fight off waves of enemies like in a beat-em-up. These encounters pop up a few times throughout the game, and I can see why some players might find them strange. Personally, I don't mind them too much, but I'll be honest, they don't add much depth to the game compared to the side-scrolling portions of the level. Most are over pretty quickly, but there are a few that seem pointless and drag on just enough to bring the pace of the game down a bit. After finishing the level, we're shown our rank, based on the number of collectibles found, the optional challenges completed, and a few other performance metrics like time, kills, and combos. Hit the targets, and your rank goes up. I really appreciate how clearly the game communicates this. Too many games leave you guessing what the requirements even are. That said, it would be better if these targets were visible before finishing the level, maybe somewhere in the pause menu. I actually have quite a bit to say about this ranking system. It pushes players to improve, but it's also surprisingly easy to exploit. I'll dive into that later though. For now, let's stick to the game's main progression and take a look at the next set of mechanics. The Guillotine Boost, the first ability you're taught once you're in control of Kenji, allows you to bounce off enemies and projectiles. It appears unremarkable at first, but its real potential starts to show when you try to avoid direct combat. Not only does it enhance mobility, but it also grants invincibility frames and has a surprisingly generous hitbox that allows you to hit enemies behind you. The iframes are forgiving enough to even let you bypass certain stage hazards, though pulling it off still requires solid timing. You also have a dodge, letting you roll through enemies as well as environmental obstacles. It's also the fastest movement option you have, so it is recommended to roll as much as you can if you want to beat the stage within the time requirements. The roll dodge also gives you different attacks. You can do a lunge attack and a circular slash if you do a roll jump. Both are incredibly useful and add a bit more depth to the game. Being able to roll through these wooden crushers might cause a bad first impression if you're hoping for a brutal challenge, but there are hazards later in the game that cannot be avoided like this. With mobility options such as these, even some of the toughest enemies fail to act as a barrier, and in fact they can be used for platforming, as not even their projectile attacks can stop you. This can be helpful when routing certain sequences, but it can be abused to just roll past everything if you feel so inclined. Most players probably won't try to play this way, at least not on their first run when they're just learning the level, but it doesn't change the fact that the game doesn't really put up much resistance against this type of strategy. If you find yourself stuck in a tough section and just want to move on, you've basically got two options. You can either try to pull off a stylish combo chain, taking out enemies one by one, or just skip all the enemies entirely. How you handle this problem is completely up to you. Rushing through might not look impressive, but for a lot of players that doesn't really matter, especially when it works. This approach may not be flashy, but it gets the job done. Apart from boss fights, which I'll get into later, the game never forces you to take the hard route. That's not inherently bad. It makes the game more accessible and less punishing for a wider range of players. But for those who prefer a challenge that must be overcome, this design choice might feel a little bit too lenient. Those aforementioned movement options, the guillotine boost and the roll dodge, are so powerful that, in a way, they discourage the use of the game's next mechanic, Hypercharges. Kill an enemy that has an aura, and you absorb its essence, allowing you to use a Hypercharge, a powered-up attack that kills tough enemies in just one hit, and can even stun bosses. By holding the attack button, we can do a manual Hypercharge, sacrificing a bit of health in the process. I didn't use this too often outside of boss fights, but I think it's good depending on the situation. There is a fundamental problem with manual Hypercharge though. You take less damage from bumping into enemies than you do by damaging yourself to get a Hypercharge. You know how in beat-em-ups you typically have a special move that costs a bit of health? It's worth using it because the enemies can hurt you a lot more than you're gonna hurt yourself. Here, it's the opposite. You can jump on an enemy, try to guillotine boost. If it fails, you can recover mid-air, which effectively acts like a double jump, exploit the lengthy invincibility window to just get through them. And you can brute force your way to the next checkpoint and get a free health refill. It surprises me how easy it is to do this if you're just playing for survival, even on hard mode. I feel like something is missing here. Maybe an enemy designed specifically to counter guillotine boost, or enemies you absolutely cannot roll through, similar to how Ninja Gaiden Black had enemies that could counter the flying swallow. The reason I said earlier that Hypercharge is somewhat discouraged is because it takes some memorization to learn where the enemies are. It takes time to route the kills properly, and it takes significantly less effort to just damage boost your way through everything. This becomes especially true when Kumori, the kunoichi from the Black Spider clan, joins forces with Kenji. Not long after completing the initial stages, players are introduced to Kumori through a level designed to showcase her unique abilities. Kumori's primary weapon is the kunai, which is very spammable. I think they got inspiration from the Black Spider ninjas in NG2. She also has access to a ranged version of the Hypercharge ability, making her exceptionally effective at dealing with enemies from a distance. After her introductory chapter, Kumori joins forces with Kenji and her gameplay becomes a little bit more complex. Now, the sections where you control her are time-limited. These moments, while brief, often feature some of the game's most challenging platforming sequences. Using Kumori's kunai consumes ki, which can be replenished by landing hits on enemies. Integrating her kunai and spider weapons into your playstyle can take some time, but once mastered, it becomes incredibly rewarding. In order to gain Hypercharge, enemies with a light blue aura must be defeated using Kenji, while those with a dark purple aura need to be taken down by Kumori. It's important to note that you don't have to kill them with an attack that matches their aura. You're just greatly rewarded if you do so, but enemies will still take damage from anything you throw at them. Spider weapons offer a range of powerful options, the first being the Kama, a weapon that feels reminiscent of the axe sub-weapon from the Castlevania series. Kumori also gains access to Ragebound art, powerful special abilities that range from devastating screen-clearing attacks to more utility-focused moves. The first one you unlock is Kunai Barrage, but additional arts and spider weapons can be purchased from Muramasa's shop. To unlock them, you need to hit certain rank thresholds at the end of levels. Usually that's not too hard, unless you're just sprinting past everything. So in that sense, the game does give you a bit of incentive to actually engage with the combat. We can also find talismans at Muramasa's shop, each offering different effects, some more impactful than others. Nearly all of them make your character more powerful in some way. But the most interesting talismans to me are the challenge talismans, which are designed to make the game harder. However, it's not entirely clear from the descriptions which talismans will create a greater challenge. For example, it's not obvious which option increases the difficulty more: no healing from checkpoints or no healing from orbs. The only way to find out is by trying them yourself, which takes time. And if you're already feeling let down by the game's lack of challenge up to this point, you might not be motivated to experiment just to figure out which talismans actually raise the stakes. Personally, my favorite way to play is by using Perilousness, which causes me to take triple damage, and Unworthy, which disables healing from checkpoints. On top of that, I aim to complete levels without dying, as if I were wearing the No Rest for the Wicked talisman. I chose not to disable all healing because doing that would force me to rely on Healing Fountain, unless I do a no damage run. And since the original games had healing items scattered throughout the levels, this setup feels like it's faithful to the classic trilogy. To be honest, I find some of the challenge talismans a bit underwhelming. A few of them impose restrictions I can already self-impose. For example, Scarcity removes healing orbs, but I can just choose not to pick them up. No Rest for the Wicked essentially just resets the stage for me. The way I see it, this doesn't make the game more challenging, it just makes learning it less efficient. I think the game missed an opportunity here. Talismans that say removed mid-air recovery or reduced the invincibility frames on guillotine boost and roll dodge would have offered more meaningful limitations in my opinion, ones that better reflect the kind of difficulty found in the classic games. Another thing that's frustrating is that going for an S++ rank requires you to equip these talismans. This makes most of the other talismans feel like wasted effort in retrospect. You go through the trouble of unlocking them only to realize you're not going to use them. At the end of the day, if you're aiming for S++, you're really only choosing from a pool of 4. Ironically, if you equip these talismans to make the game harder, it actually makes it easier to get S ranks, which is really odd. You can ignore challenges, collectibles, requirements, die multiple times, and just play worse in general, and still get an S rank just because you have those talismans equipped. Talismans aren't the only way to increase difficulty though. The game also features a hard mode. Unlocking it required beating normal mode first, but the game was updated very recently, and you can now unlock it by beating Ryu in the tutorial level. For many fans, hard mode is where the real Ninja Gaiden experience begins. While the latter half of normal mode already demands memorization and precision, hard mode ramps everything up significantly. Right from the start, it makes an impression. Early tutorial stages are transformed into platforming gauntlets. You face more enemies, more traps, and even upgraded versions of existing foes, similar to Ninja Gaiden Black. Healing orbs are scarcer, and checkpoints are spaced farther apart, forcing you to play smarter and more carefully. Even the first boss fight gets a makeover, now featuring environmental traps like fire and spikes. Unfortunately, this level of redesign doesn't extend to the rest of the bosses. While they do become more aggressive and tankier, their arenas remain unchanged. A bit of a missed opportunity that feels like a step back in an otherwise smart difficulty curve. Still, the bosses remain a standout. They're among the toughest challenges the game throws at you, partly because boss fights are some of the only moments where progression is locked behind true mastery. You can't just jump over or roll through everything here. Chasing S++ ranks in hard mode offers a compelling challenge for those who enjoy pushing their limits, but it's definitely not for everyone. This style of play can feel as little more than just a checklist for some, and they won't find that particularly engaging. It doesn't help that some of these challenges are kind of redundant. My favorites are probably the ones where you have to do certain sections without being hit, but then you have challenges like kill enemy of specified type, which is something that you're probably going to do anyway if you're going for S++ rank. Of course, if you're just going for regular S or S+, then this gives you some flexibility, I suppose. And this is what's controversial about Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, how it handles its challenge. It's not a game that is difficult by default. You have to seek the challenge, and it's not entirely clear where that challenge is. I wish the talismans were just default options in a very hard mode or something, and I could just use the regular talismans and explore what works best on each stage. Doing difficult things in a game is not the same as the game itself being difficult. Classic Ninja Gaiden is difficult from the get-go, and the player looks for ways to make it easier by any means necessary. Utilizing powerful moves wasn't just about score, it was about staying alive. This is true for both 2D and 3D games. You come up with strategies to defeat the game's difficulty, not increase it. It's brutal, and you're trying to survive however you can. That is the journey. In Ragebound, the game is actually easy, and you have to restrain yourself from breaking it. You have to deliberately give yourself disadvantages to make the game harder. You have to go out of your way to kill enemies that are not posing a threat to you to get an S rank. It's a different journey, and at the end of the day, even if you go through this, you might still ask yourself, is the game any more difficult, or is it just what I have chosen to do that is actually difficult? As much as I love Ragebound, and I do think it's a great game, I think it relies too much on this checklist, these debuffs, to create challenges that should be handled by the level design and the enemy design. If what you're looking for is a tough game to beat, Ninja Gaiden Ragebound might not do it for you, because you can beat the game without much trouble. However, if you want to master this game, and by that I mean not just getting good ranks, but actually sharpening your combat and movement skills, then you're going to have a great time, as there is a lot of mechanical depth to be explored here. In this video, I focused primarily on criticizing the game's difficulty, because that's a very important part of the identity of this franchise. But despite everything I said, I do love the game. While the lack of challenge left me somewhat disappointed, Ninja Gaiden is more than just a hard game for me, and Ragebound made me extremely happy as a fan in many other ways. So much so, I didn't even notice the questionable balancing at first because the game was just so much fun. The story won't blow anyone's mind, but I found it quite entertaining. I love how it connects the lore of the 2D games with the 3D titles, and I especially enjoy the dynamic between Kenji and Kumori, how they bicker and tease each other like siblings, but still respect one another as warriors. It made their dialogue really fun to read. The visuals are spectacular, not just in terms of how pretty everything looks, but it has minimal readability issues. It's all very clean. Everything that the player needs to see, you can see clearly, and it's communicated well visually. The music is outstanding, from the original tracks to the remixes of the classic tunes. I loved every second of it. I did have to jump through many hoops to find a playstyle and a difficulty level that felt good to me, but once I did, it clicked, and Ragebound became one of my favorite games in the series, and one that I highly recommend. And that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what your experience was like playing Ninja Gaiden Ragebound. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe for more. Until next time.